All right. Here you are, another episode of Moped Outlaws with our special guest, Jack Kammer.
It's an interesting episode. Jack really cares about men's issues. And the discussion is very it kind of takes a little while to get going. But then it really gets juicy and good. And it's well worth the effort of going in and following the thread because, we've done a lot of work to help create a better world and to wake people up around issues of inequality and sexism and things like that. And I think that it's not incorrect to say that on some level, pieces of what men need have been left out of the discussion. And Jack spent a lot of time and energy studying this subject, and he's gotten degrees and he's written a lot about it. And it's a very even-handed approach. It's not like your average MGTOW sort of reactionary sort of, men, we're getting a bad rap. It's actually very well informed. And I think for that reason, it's well worth the listen.
I agree 1,000%. And just as a footnote, Mark and I were discussing this episode. We thought, the first half hour was like prologue, and then it really took off. So if you'd like to fast forward about 23 to 30 minutes, you can skip the prologue, but it really is very valuable. And it comes from his personal experience as a young kid, as a young white male kid, what he experienced, and him going, hey.
It's the internet era. We have a fast forward button. We can do whatever we want. But definitely don't not listen. That would be a mistake. You'd really be missing out. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Please go to our website and support the two charities that we are interested in supporting, Blast and the Compton Cowboys. And remember, you matter.
Say some, no?
11.
Bestuur zeker wegen dem.
Yo iets niet, joh.
Two outlaws on the lam, taking the back roads through America.
You can't drink enough coffee for this show.
And now it's time for Monday Madness with the Moped Outlaws, Greg and Mark.
All right, welcome to another episode of Moped Outlaws. Today's guest is Jack Kammer, and he has a master's in social work, a master's in business from the University of Maryland, and runs something called Male Friendly Media. Has extensive experience with the discussion about male-female dynamics and power structures and the evolution of how we talk about these things in service to society as a whole. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I did a little bit of reading and have a few prepped questions, but mostly I'm interested in just following the thread. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you very much. It is very good to be here, gentlemen.
Yeah, so I started out reading about the inspiration that you had from the book, The Hazards of Being Male and Surviving the Myth of Masculine Privilege by Herb Goldberg. And I'm curious about what inspired you about that book, but what is the myth of masculine privilege?
So what inspired me was that it talked about the idea, the concept of masculine privilege. What is the myth? Well, the myth is the belief that it is in all ways a man's world and that men have all the power. And I knew before I came across Herb Goldberg's book that men had some power. My question was whether we had all the power. And an even deeper question was whether I, as a man, had privileged access to the kind of power that I most want. I was not terribly interested in corporate power. I wasn't terribly interested in financial power. I came across Herb's book in about 1983. by which time I was 32 at that point, and I was beginning to realize that the most important thing that I wanted in my life was what I have subsequently learned has been sort of proven, or at least been found evidence for, by the longest longitudinal study ever conducted, it's still going on adult happiness. And a writer from The Atlantic asked the director of this study at Harvard, so what have you learned? And the director said that the most important thing for your happiness is your relationships. Not your money, not how powerful you are, not how much people fear you or even respect you, but it's about your relationships. And when I look at the realm of relationships, I don't see, and I'm talking about intimate relationships where there was a lot of expression of love and emotions and caring and warmth and nurturance. When I look at that realm, I don't see men. I don't see that is a male domain. I see men there, but it's not where men predominate.
When you define intimate relationships, are you including parent-child, close friend to close friend?
Primarily parent-child, yes. I think that is the key. But certainly, yes, a whole network of friend to friend, neighbor to neighbor.
So intimacy is, obviously, it's that element that we resonate with others.
Yes. Yes. Maybe it would help if I tell you my first, I don't even know if conscious awareness is right. I guess it was conscious, but it was ineffable. I didn't have any words for it, didn't understand the context of it. The best I can remember, it was probably when I was about, 8 or 9, 10 to 11, 12 years old, something like that. But first, let's talk about what we are familiar with. We are familiar with the fact that if we come across a young girl who's good at math, it's not a good idea to say to that young girl, gee, Susie, you're really good at math, ... for a girl. If she's good at science, you don't say, gee, Mary, you're really good at science, ... for a girl. Or sports, for a girl. We have an appreciation for what that's connected to. Even if it's not the intent, we know what gives rise to the queasy feeling we have about that kind of a left-handed compliment. It's got something to do with telling this little girl that she's a little bit odd. What I used to hear as a little boy was, gee, Jack, you're really good with babies, ... for a boy. And I didn't have words for this, but I just thought, what's that mean? What's that about? Where's that coming from? So that's the myth. I guess the probably really the myth is that there is no real value or importance to men in relationships, that we're going to get our happiness and our respect and our love, in the corporate hierarchy, in the money-making field. And that always just seemed a lot colder to me than what I saw in what I intuit to be the rather poorly defined, poorly appreciated, poorly recognized domain of relationships.
So part of what I hear you saying is that as voices were rising up saying, hey, this isn't really okay that you're saying women can't do math and these individuals can't do this. You, from your past experience and through your life, you felt an energy in you rising up saying, hey, this thing that says men can't be empathetic and compassionate with children is not okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So there's these stereotypes, right? We pigeonholing each other into these ideas, and the age of this ideology sort of flows out of the post-war period of the definition of the nuclear family and what quote unquote men do and what women do. And there was a reshuffling of that in the ensuing decades, particularly in the 60s and early 70s. But in that, this ideal of liberating women from something, allowing them to actually participate in society at levels that men had access to prior to that, that was an adjustment for our culture in a big way. And masculine privilege up until that point of departure included bank accounts, being on deeds, credit cards, those kinds of things. So masculine privilege isn't just an emotional intelligence issue. It was actually a structural social issue for a while, until there were these changes that we pushed through, that culturally pushed through, which now have women actually able to be considered and identified as persons in terms of banking and the law and those sorts of things. And it wasn't even possible for women to vote until much later in the 20th century than most people believe. So given that you had this awakening about these disparities, the idea that masculine privilege in wholly is a myth is somewhat debatable. There's the mythos of men's inadequacies in the emotional intelligence realm, but then there is the reality of male privilege as a societal construct and the way that we have access to certain things. And we attempted in the 70s and beyond to rectify that through this principle of liberation and feminism. But there were some things that were consequences of that, right? So what do you see the most significant consequences to society and then to men of that movement?
That's not the most important point that I would like to make at this point.
Okay.
So there were stereotypes that served to keep women out of traditional male domains. Let's name some. Women aren't smart, they aren't logical, they cry too much, they can't make tough decisions. We can go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Stereotypes are very key to sexism. Stereotypes justify treating one group as lesser than. Stereotypes can also be positive and serve to render our thinking about a group as more than. You know, what you've mentioned, Mark, is really not anything new in the year 2025, that there were a lot of injustices to women about what they were not allowed to do, not expected to do, not thought capable of doing. I mean, yeah, of course. So
let him finish, Greg.
Yeah. So I'm perfectly happy and always have been perfectly happy to have women enter the male domain, the traditional male domain, because I wasn't a traditional male. I didn't really want that. And, you know, when women back in the late 1800s said, a few women said, you know, I'd like to be a doctor. I'd like to be a lawyer. I'd like to be, you know, a business person. There were a lot of pressures against her pursuing that. It's a violation of natural law for a woman to want to be a lawyer. You want to argue all day? What is there about you that makes you not want to claim your natural right? It's in the Bible. You know, I don't know if it was or not, but I'm sure people quoted the Bible to justify.
Yeah, these were a lot of justifications that people used. Yeah,
yes,
for sure.
Yes. So there were women who wanted to do non-traditional things, and they faced barriers and obstacles. And we've largely gotten beyond that in the male domain. Women are recognized for their abilities to be what they were previously thought not capable of being. So we've enumerated the stereotypes about women. Most of them are passé. Most of them cannot be discussed in polite society. Most of them are certainly not embraced by our social policy-making machinery. But let's take a look at the stereotypes of men that are very much in effect today. I mean, do we really need to name them? It's kind of ugly.
No, go ahead. Let's name them. And part of why I ask is perhaps the ease with which you were able to name the feminine tropes. Like the more we name the male, it might bring healing to the situation you're speaking of.
If I can name male ones?
Right.
Yeah.
Male yeah, okay. That would be great if that happened.
Let's do it.
Okay. Men are violent. Men are mean. Men are cruel. Men are selfish. Men just want to have sex. They just want to drink beer, chase women, sit on the sofa, watch football, and they're clueless.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Now, what's the purpose of those stereotypes?
Is that a rhetorical question?
Well, I hope not. I hope it is a rhetorical question because I hope
I'd love to hear what you were going to. Yeah, I'd love to hear what you were going to enumerate from that.
The effect, if not the intention, of those stereotypes is to keep male people who want to be in the traditionally female domain, or at least have equal access to the traditionally female domain, just as women wanted equal access to the traditionally male domain. Those stereotypes serve to weaken me, to weaken my claim on an equal share of that, to weaken my protections of citizenship in that domain, and to render me as the suspect class if there is ever any disagreement or conflict that I might have with a woman regarding the benefits of that domain. Just as women were second class in corporate life.
It's true. The realm that comes to mind is in divorce. The court would go, the mother had the custody of the children sort of by default.
Yeah, there's a guilty before proven innocent in the realm of civil divorces, for sure. Right?
Yeah.
And we see story after story. I've met a couple of men recently in my work who can't get custody. They don't get a fair adjudication and presumption of innocence with any accusation that their adversary makes in the divorce proceedings to use as leverage. And those sorts of accusations can take years to iron out in the courts with unsubstantiated evidence. And there's a kind of what we have is judicial bias, really, in favor of women in that realm.
Yeah, you know, I really feel for the judges in these cases. From everything I've read and spoken to, from the judges I've spoken to, they hate having to do family law because it's so emotional. You got these precious kids at stake here, their health and happiness. And it's just really hard to know how to make the right decision. You know, the evidence can be very slippery and very much he said, she said. But, you know, I gather from Mark's recital of the injustices done to women and the need you may have felt to make that recital, that I don't get that. And that you might think, based on what you read in the media about the quote unquote manosphere, that I'm a troglodyte.
Just to be clear, I wasn't making those assumptions about you. My question was more about the context of the social evolution.
Okay, so I will take the idea that that my fear that I am regarded as a troglodyte and try to convince you of exactly the opposite. I would maintain that there is a very large segment of the manosphere, the branch of the men's movement that I belong to, that I could argue is the most progressive movement on the social scene today, because we want to move away from the excesses of life for men in the traditional sphere. Life for men in the traditional sphere often ends up getting us incarcerated. So, you know, there's conflict, strife, violence, stress, which can bring about jail and early death and unhappiness. And as a society, we don't want any of that stuff. The men don't want it, and we don't want to have it in our midst. But when stories such as the ones you know, Mark, of men being treated very badly, what's the word going out on the street? The word that goes going out to men on the street is, you're going to get screwed, or your investment is not protected. We want men to invest not further into the realm of competition and strife and getting locked up. De-emphasize that, because, fellas, there's something a lot better over here. Invest in that. But smart men are going to say, well, wait a second, that investment really does not look very safe. It's certainly not insured. And so I would really like to believe that our society really wants me to use my talents and skills and abilities, my nurturing instinct, my love, my humanity, in the service of raising happy kids. But I don't think society really cares, might not even believe that it's real. And so I'm going to stay over here, and I'm going to get pissed off when a woman tries to take my job. We got to open it up. You know, just as there were sort of quote unquote oddball women 100 years ago who wanted to be lawyers and not follow what the Bible said they should follow, there are a lot of men who aren't encouraged to talk about it, but a lot of men that I've come across in my work in the men's movement who say, man, I would give up my job in a heartbeat to be closer to my kids. if I could make that work. And you know, there is such good news in this part of the men's movement, because there are a lot of women who have really great talents as business people. They're smart, they believe in teamwork, they don't feel like they need to invest their entire personality and sense of self in how much money they make. They're concerned about corporate values, you know, just a lot of good things that women have brought to the corporate world and to the world of academia and science and law. It was a shame when we wasted all of that female talent. It is currently a shame that we are wasting all of the male talent that is available in formerly female spaces. And the payoff is that there are women who care very much about work-life balance. They want to make CEO. Their plan is, in 9 years, I'm going to be the CEO of either this company or some other one. And that means they know that they're going to have to work a lot. But they also want to have kids. They love their kids. They want to make sure their kids are doing well and are happy. And they have trouble finding really good daycare that they can trust and that's reliable. So they really benefit from having guys like me who don't want the corporate life, who feel that our talents are much more in the nurturing world, so that she and I can be in love, respect each other, trust each other, care about each other, and maximize the best of each other. It's not a zero-sum game. It's synergy.
Do you mind my asking, did you find that in your personal life? Did you partner with someone and that existed?
One of the strongest object lessons of my life was that my father was a doctor, pretty successful by traditional male standards, who became an alcoholic. He was not a happy man. He came home tired, exhausted, grumpy, because he was a family doctor, worked a lot of hours, even did house calls late at night. He was a good man, but he was an alcoholic, and he was not a good father, for the most part. I got some very good traits from him, but you know, it would be a stretch to say he was a great father. You know, I've had to learn a lot of things just sort of on my own, just trying to figure things out. So I knew I didn't want that life. I remember very well that my extended family would come over to our house every Sunday because my mother's mother lived with us. And so my mother's brothers, their families came over every Sunday and we had spaghetti because my grandmother was a half Italian. It was just great fun. But I do remember very, very much that the women were in one room talking and laughing and having fun, and the kids were all running around. And my father and one of my uncles were always talking about money. And who could blame them? My father had 7 kids. And he's trying to figure out, how the hell do I put these kids through college? They were talking about the stock market and investments and how to make money. And that's all necessary and good stuff. But it's not what I wanted in my life. I also remember thinking as a kid, I really can't think of anything sadder than watching all of these fathers of all of my friends in the neighborhood getting up in the morning, getting in their car, driving into town or driving to the train station to ride into some city, into some office, into some place away from their kids all day. nothing seemed less attractive to me than that.
What about in your adult life?
So, I'll take a couple of minutes for this story. So I never, well, I was born in 51, so I was in my prime dating years in the 70s and 80s, when the women's movement was just sort of getting started. It would have been great for me if I could have found a woman who said, yeah, I'm going to be a doctor, and I'm going to make a lot of money, and I'm looking for a man who's not into all that and would love to raise a family. I would have said, sign me up. There weren't too many women like that. And even today, we aren't terribly surprised to hear that probably for the most part, female doctors do not marry male nurses. But my father was a male doctor who married a female nurse, my mother. So I never got married. I turned 60. And it occurred to me, all right, maybe you need to get on one of these dating platforms, try to find a partner. It was way past time for me to be a father. I mean, I had had a vasectomy too. So I signed up for Senior People Meet. At the time, I had just finished my degree in social work. I couldn't find a job in social work that was working with men. The gender bias of social work is that's a topic worth a whole show. But I did find a job in the Baltimore City Jail working with men. After a year of that, I found a job as a parole and probation agent in Baltimore working with men. I was making something like $32,000 a year. And this was in like 2010, making $32K. It wasn't about the money. For me, it was about my mission. I feel something about what's going on with men and that we need to, as a society, pay attention to what's going on with these guys who are shooting each other and getting locked up and being on parole and probation and maybe going back to jail. That was my mission. I was on Senior People Meet. I wasn't getting matched with people that looked good to me. Funny stories about who I did hear from. But then, and I should tell you that when I signed up for Senior People Meet, I signed up for the shortest term I could, 1 month. And I think it was $29.99. And I wasn't making any money. I mean, I was so tight for money that I kept my thermostat at 42 degrees all winter. So I didn't have to pay a big fuel oil bill. So $29.99 was a pretty big piece of change for me. And when I got to the end of the sign-up process on Senior People Meet, it said $29.99 plus $2.99 handling fee or some, baloney fee. And I said, $2.99? Where'd that come from? This is a ripoff. And I backed up, and I found, okay, all right, they did mention the $2.99 fee. Okay. All right. Click.
That sounds very male.
No, it sounds very impoverished, impecunious male, maybe. So I hit okay, and I'm on Senior People Meet. Meanwhile, this woman who is currently upstairs, my wife, she had joined Senior People Meet, and she was not finding anybody she really liked. The one she remembers most is a fellow who put himself out there with a profile name of Orgasmatron.
A superhero.
A superhero. Yeah. So, she wasn't finding anybody she liked. And she started thinking, why am I not seeing anybody that I like? And then she thought about it. Maybe I need to modify my profile. Now, my wife is a big deal scientist. I mean, world-class scientist.
Congratulations.
And when she filled out her profile, you know, they ask, well, how much money do you think your ideal partner would make? And I think she said she checked something like 300K. You know, just, you know, because anybody that she would be interested in and attracted to and on an intellectual par with is probably making at least 300K.
Because she is, so.
Because she is. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the circle she goes in, right?
That's brilliant.
So she unchecked that salary requirement, and the algorithm recalculated and dipped down into the 32K category.
And there you were.
And there I was.
That's brilliant.
Now, she was, you know, way past childbearing age. So, she missed that boat too. But we did talk about, you know, sort of the shame of that. That, you know, I don't have any kids. She doesn't have any kids. We probably would have liked to have had kids. Although, you know, maybe not. But we talked about there's probably a lot of this kind of disconnect going on in academia, where there are female scientists and female professors and who would really like to find, you know, a 32K guy who's a really good guy. And we talked about starting the renegotiation project, whereby she and I, after she retired, this was years before she retired, she just retired less than a year ago, whereby we during retirement would, you know, put together a little dog and pony show and travel around the country to conferences and HR shows and conferences to talk about, let's not forget that work-life balance needs to involve men too. And the payoff is, you know, this. It's good for everybody. We never did it. I still have hope of doing a form of it. Actually, I think probably what I'm doing right now is a form of it, to try to help us recognize that there are probably, we don't really know, I don't think anybody has done a valid scientific survey of this question, but we do know from the Pew Research Center not too long ago that it's men, even more than women, who say they do not spend enough time with their kids. This is a very deep hunger men have. We need to see it as an opportunity.
Do you mind my asking, if we look at the current political landscape of the United States, do you think that, generally speaking, socially, United States is ready for this kind of mindset that you and your wife want to put out to the world?
I think probably it would be a large pill for both the left and the right to swallow. The right, because, you know, you got to be a manly man. You know, when I became a man, I put away childish things, and I focused on making money and doing the important things that men do, which is why it's so great to be a man, because I'm so important. I think it's going to be a bitter pill for the left to swallow as well, because, at least in the United States, the left is associated with the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party is very much in the same way of thinking as the women's movement. You know, they think they're very progressive because they support feminism. when, me and my buddies say, no, you're going to be really progressive if you support the progressive men's movement. Because the problem is that feminism is completing the deal and getting the kinds of opportunities for women that they really want and need, work-life balance without worry about how are the kids today at the daycare center. That is best served by the progress and the success of the progressive men's movement.
What's occurring to me, if you don't mind, is we have these areas of inequity that we're all intelligently aware of. And for healing to take place, I see that all the areas of inequity need to be addressed. And you're bringing up one that isn't addressed, or rarely so, or almost. Now, I mentioned this and I could see, Mark, I just saw your reaction. It reminds me, the realm we're in is an area that Mark puts a lot of energy into and talks about. In fact, we just had a conversation with a guest a couple weeks ago, and Mark differentiated there's toxicity and there's masculinity, and they're two different things, and that by applying them together as though one, you're poisoning the element of masculinity that is a natural, healthy part of an individual.
It sounds right to me. The whole concept of toxic masculinity and how it has been, I think, flipped from its original meaning it's really counterproductive. It certainly puts men on the defensive.
So there's a fair amount of social context that drives these tropes. It's one of which is we've always done it this way, and it's what our fathers taught us and all of that. But there's also economic forces that try to reinforce it, because there's an advantage to defining roles like this and then having advertising that can poke at those roles to drive sales, right? Because when you set up an identity paradigm that you're supposed to look like this if you're a man, and then you reinforce that with thousands and thousands of advertising messages trying to get you to buy things that will close the loop for you, there's a whole lot of economic investment behind maintaining these tropes. Now, that being said, there's some general, I would say, biological predilections or tendencies that do align with those tropes, depending on who you are and what your biochemistry is. So there's a lot of men that like being in the role of economic engine and physical challenger and, leader and, chop wood guy and those sorts of things. And my ethos, what I hope for in the evolution of men's work, is this idea that it's both and, that you can be present and have intimate relationships and high emotional intelligence with all different kinds of people, but most importantly, your kids, and model this idea of full spectrum human expression, right? And what we're struggling against, I think, on some level, is rebellion against these tropes as if that's going to shift it. But what I think what's really the work is to just be who you are at the highest level that you're aware of and capable of. And so men's work to me is to find where a certain male is on whatever side of the spectrum, whether he's really stoic and caught up in this whole lumberjack stoicism, tough guy image, or whether he's very sensitive and empathetic and all of those. And each of those guys might have different yearnings to enrich their lives. And it's a matter of finding access to those kinds of behavioral things. And this is where I think you and I align. Men should be encouraged to develop EQ and should be encouraged to have highly skillful communication techniques that allow them access to intimacy and emotional connection, right? And at the same time, if you want to be a firefighter or a race car driver or, a boxer and be aggressive in the way that you approach things, that should be okay, right?
Yes. Look, there are probably lumberjacks who read poetry. There are probably lumberjacks who write poetry.
Right.
The idea is to be who the hell you are.
Right.
My definition of a real man is a man who does not care at all about anybody else's definition of a real man. Now, Mark, you started an interesting line of thinking a few minutes ago by talking about how marketing creates an image that men feel they want to embrace and should embrace, and that this creates a lot of financial incentives in the economy and in the culture for men to be that way. I notice that you didn't say anything along the same lines about how much marketing and advertising is done to women to create in them the idea that what they should be is, soft and feminine and a mother and sexy and, that kind of thing. And, that's, again, why I think there's really two domains that we really need to look at in tandem. And we really didn't look in tandem at the early days. The women's movement has not looked in tandem, has not looked at both sides. If the women's movement were a hydroelectric dam that was being proposed, it never would have been allowed to happen. Because you know why, Greg, right? There was no environmental impact statement. There was no consideration of the ecosystem. There was no consideration of, well, what's that going to do over here, and how's that going to affect this, and how do we, make sure that that's mitigated and this works, and maybe we need to modify this plan a little bit to avoid this bad effect. None of that happened. It started out happening. I'll tell you a little bit about that. Betty Friedan in 1963 wrote The Feminine Mystique. When I went back to read that book about 10 years ago, I expected to hear, men were the problem. She didn't say that at all. She was actually very sympathetic to the kinds of things that, the progressive men's movement talks about. She even cited in her book a Red Book magazine article that was titled, Why Young Husbands Feel Trapped. This is a book about trying to liberate women from hoary stereotypes. But she recognized that there were also exquisite pressures placed on men according to stereotyped ideas of men and how our society had to run. So we really need to, get equal, and right now, women are way far ahead in opening up their opportunities for themselves. And, men gotta catch up, because it's going to get easier when we work together, when we enjoy the synergies that we can create between us.
Well, I think that's kind of a trope in itself, what you just said. I think it's powerful leverage to argue certain points with that. But the truth is, since the ecotopian revolution of the 70s, the incentive was to become who you fully wanted to be. And that bumped up against the inability of what we'll call the Christian conservative movement to shift. But there was a shit ton of identity shifts that took place in this culture in America and then globally that redefined what men and women could do with their time and how they showed up. And we've been in that experiment now for probably into the second, maybe the third generation since then, of how personal agency becomes an expression based on where you fit along your own desire, what it is you want for yourself. And more that those classic 50s nuclear family tropes are being relied upon by fearful people who don't understand how to shift into a guided role. Like when it's a wide open possibility and men can be very emotional and be therapists and soft and all of those things, men who don't have those skill sets feel challenged in their domains, right? And the same is true for women in terms of how do I show up if I don't understand the paradigm of what a powerful woman is, or a woman who understands her own sexuality, these kinds of things. So culturally, the omission of my statement about women, it was implicit to me, right? Like just the cosmetic industry. That's one, like the fashion industry. And it's constantly being reinforced by, reality TV, the Hollywood wives and the Kardashians and all of that. We still live in a society that leverages feminine sexuality as a way to keep women in line and then to entice men to behavioral paradigms. Right. But the answer has always been there since the 70s. It's not women's liberation. It's human liberation that we're after. Right. And so as men in men's work, the work we're doing is to free ourselves from whatever the ideological chains of our conditioning are that think we're supposed to show up XYZ in order to have access to the nutrients, the emotional nutrients, the physical nutrients, and then also the economic nutrients that sustain our lives. And it's a weird context. Like we stopped educating each other and our kids at this level somewhere around the 80s when Reagan came back in, and there was this huge pushback on the cultural shifts that were happening. And, there was a reassertion of this archetype of the lone male hero, right? One of the things that interests me, and I want to be personal about this, Jack. When you described your dating life, there was this massive 30-year gap that you didn't talk about. And I'm wondering, what was your experience around sexual power and the power to create the relationships that you wanted to have during that period of time? Did you feel like powerless to create those relationships? What were the forces that had you feel how you felt, whether it was powerless or not powerless?
There was a lot of loneliness. Probably not 30 years full, but it was typified by a time I met this very attractive woman. Really liked her. I mean, not just physically attractive. We just sort of hit it off. And very early on, she told me about her maternal instinct, and I told her about my paternal instinct. Never saw her again.
Wow.
What does that mean? You told her about your paternal instinct.
That I was interested in doing more than make money. That I wanted to be fully invested in the emotional life of my family.
And did you couch that in terms of, I didn't want to be an economic driver of family wealth? Is that kind of what that meant for you?
Well, that's certainly the point that I was trying to make. Yeah,
and she wanted that, right? She wanted a breadwinner, right?
Well, I can't say that. Okay. I suspect she did. I can't say how much money she was willing to make herself, but she was making it clear that she wanted to have kids, her maternal instinct. And when I, responded with the equal desire on my side, that wasn't compatible. It wasn't doable. And so I took it to mean that she was looking for, somebody who would do the complete non-parental thing. I shouldn't say complete because, fathers who work their asses off 80 hours a week are doing the parental thing just, as a way it's sort of traditionally and narrowly defined. For other parts of that 30 years, there was a lot of, casual dating. But, I had no money. And it was a very big detriment.
Yeah, so do you think there's a biological imperative besides a sociological imperative for women to feel that men are producers and and providers?
Sure. Biological imperative suggests that it's in our DNA, and our DNA has been formed over eons. And so, yeah, eons ago, we had to have women taking care of the kids because things were rough and we needed to specialize and capture every bit of efficiency we could provide for our little band of humans walking across the grasslands of the Serengeti. So we're going to specialize. You've got the breasts. You take care of the baby. I've got slightly bigger muscles. I'll keep the saber-toothed tigers at bay. Yeah, of course, there is a biological imperative. However, the way I look at it is that biology is hardware. Culture is software. Software is much easier to change than hardware is. We have a software problem. And if we really want to change the imperatives, we will incentivize each other and reward each other. You mentioned encouraging men to do something. I forget exactly what it was, but you talked about encouraging men to do something good. And I didn't interrupt, but I thought immediately I wanted to say, even better than encouraging them is incentivizing them. Make it worth their while. Prove it to them. Don't just say, oh, it's going to be so good for you. Show me that it's going to be good for me. Show me that when I downplay how much money I make in my life, that I am loved and respected and rewarded and cherished and appreciated.
Well, but the evidence isn't there for that.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
So why I mentioned the biological imperative is that now in modern culture, the software of feminine arousal is related to the hormonal patterns that are triggered by those male behaviors that we are now talking about as tropes, right? And so if the hardware is also influenced by hormones that have been built for eons for partnering, and the different ways that brain chemistry work for attraction and then bonding are driven by these male behaviors that we're talking about as traditional male behaviors, that's a powerful evidence that it's not just cultural or economic conditioning that's driving these roles, that it's an actual sort of human function that's driving these roles. It's like, for women to bond, there's this need for safety and this need for a man to provide and to protect, and for them to feel sexual aggression and desire from the man, right? That are we all sort of see now as potentially not the traits we want men to be pigeonholed in. But the way I've seen life evolve is that there's some reality to this trigger mechanism, to the hormonal responses, which are unconscious. They're not driven by the conscious mind. Feminine arousal is very much attuned to masculine tendencies in the traditional forms that we see them. And I don't think there's any way to break that down. That it seems like it's a fait accompli to me.
If you talk to another segment of the men's movement, you'll run into you ever heard of the MGTOWs?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Men going their own way. They're on the dating scene. And what they say about the dating scene isn't that women are looking for men to impregnate them. They are looking for a good time. They're young. They're not sure they ever want to get married. They're not sure they want to have kids. They want to have fun. They're making their own money. And the MGTOW men really have a hard time when the women that they encounter far too often, they say, expect them to pay for the first date. And that's not about getting pregnant. That's about maximizing your advantages. It's about money. It's about fun, going out to a nice dinner. So yes, there are biological imperatives when you think about forming a family and having kids. You know, at the same time that we talk about the what arouses women to want to copulate and reproduce, we should recognize that there is some alternative explanation about why men want women with really big boobs. It's not because they're, ignorant slobs and lascivious dogs. It's because there is a biological connection between big boobs and the ability of a woman to be to increase the probability of that the kids or that the babies will survive. Same thing with hips, the size of hips.
Absolutely.
So I don't think we're talking, at least the discord I hear from the MGTOW types, who I believe get a really bad rap, because to me, what they are manifesting is not misogyny. It's what they're manifesting primarily is integrity. I know what my values are. I know what I want. I know what I can put up with. I know what flexibility I have. And I know what I won't put up with. I know what's beyond my limits. And it's beyond my limits when we have fairly successfully approached completion of the movement of giving women complete opportunity in traditional male domains. And I am still stuck in the traditional male domains by the expectations that these supposedly liberated women are placing upon men whom they will deem worthy of their company.
Yes,
so
and I think
it's not encouraging men, it's incentivizing them. And so the message here, the payoff here, the beauty here is to help women understand that this is really in your long-term best interests. It's really going to be better for everybody, including your sons, if you have any, including your daughters, if you have any, in the future, if we sort of open this up and maximize each other rather than try to use each other.
I agree. I think the idea that we should be in the constant evolution of liberating each other to greater and greater possibilities as human beings is ultimately it. But I think in the context of what we're talking about, there are some what I'll call hangovers of biological imperative that still influence the subconscious and involuntary nervous system aspects of male-female dynamics. And those rules aren't subject to the theories of equanimity and equality and equal, opportunity for men and women. It doesn't work that way from a mechanical sort of point of view, right? And it's not just that it's about kids, even though that's part of the triggering mechanism. It's this idea that a man who won't pay for the first date has all of these other issues that might be an impediment to what women's desire is. And this kind of brings us into the discussion of, if men have all the power, how come women make all the rules, which is a book that you wrote. And I think this kind of touches on this. What we're talking about is the power dynamics now of coupling, and how, different desire matrices, like the ones that are aligned with you, where you don't want to be caught in these traditional provisory sort of old masculine trope things. And there's a lot of women who don't want that kind of man in their life, because there's a lot of, bad things that go with that in terms of like emotional disconnection and unhealthy habits and all these things. But just from the perspective of that other book that you wrote, how does that play into the point in the discussion that we're at?
Well, I want to talk a bit about that book and its title, because it's a pretty provocative title.
Yeah.
Do you know the backstory of that book?
No, I only got a sense of it from what I did doing like about an hour of research on your work.
Okay, that was my second book.
Yeah.
Do you know what my first book was?
Is it Heroes of the Blue Sky Rebellion?
That's the third.
That was your third. So no, I don't remember the title of the first book.
The first book I wrote was called Goodwill Toward Men. It was a book of interviews with 22 women, most of whom identified as feminist, who were, in my estimation, genuine feminists. They were ready, willing, and able to talk not just about the disadvantages that women face as women, but the advantages. And they were willing to talk not just about the advantages men face as men, but also the disadvantages. It was sort of the missing half of the gender equality movement, as voiced and articulated by women. It was a very nice book, very healing. It had all kinds of great blurbs from people in the healing spaces and psychological spaces. My editor was sending me notes on when he returned my chapters to me, with notes saying things like, I am getting incredibly excited about this book. I had big hopes for it. The book got published on Valentine's Day, 1994. It wasn't long after that I was summoned to a sales meeting at St. Martin's Press to talk about this book. I said, great, give me a date. I'm there. I'm dying to talk about this book to the salespeople. Well, that meeting got canceled. Never happened. And the book just was canceled before canceling was a thing.
Yeah.
Because certain female staff members at St. Martin's Press, and I want to give a shout out to one of the female staff members to whom this does not apply, and that was the director of PR at St. Martin's Press, a woman who got me on the Today Show. Well, you know, and you can't do better than that. She was great. But the lower level staff accused my book of being reactionary. I said, well, did you read it? No. But we don't like it. My book got canceled. And so, you know, the idea is that the men at St. Martin's Press, you know, all the big men in the big corporate jobs, the men have all the power. And I say, well, if men have all the power, how come these women are making the rules? And that's the book that I wrote as a catharsis. And it had the dual purpose of saying it's nonsensical to say that men have all the power.
Because I just got canceled.
Huh?
Because you just got canceled.
I just got canceled. So,
but you weren't canceled for the men that have all the power book. It was for the Goodwill Towards Men book that you got canceled.
Well, yes, but this is good too. So I wrote, if men have all the power, how come women make the rules? Sort of as a catharsis, but also as a very pithy way of saying some things that I thought were very true. And I found another agent in New York, a woman named Nancy Love. I can mention her now. She's deceased, but she was an old-time New York agent, very nice woman. Presented the book to her, and she took it on. And she said, I'll sell this, no problem. I said, Nancy, what's your normal percentage for a sale? She said 15%, like everybody else. I said, I want you to take 20. She said, why? I said, because I want you to have an incentive to stay with it, because this is going to be a hard book to sell. She said, oh, that's crazy. I'm going to sell this book. Well, she could not sell the book. And in fact, one of the notes she got from a big deal executive, an executive vice president, and a senior vice president and executive editor, I don't know, some muckety-muck title, a man His first name was Rick. Might have been Rich. He sent her a note saying, while I was not crazy about the one-liner approach, because I said I just kept it very pithy, there is a lot of truth at the heart of this book. But the amount of rancor this book would inspire among the women in-house would be enormous. I will let one of my male competitors be the one who gets pummeled. Which pretty much was a second example that proved the premise of my second book.
Got it.
If these men are so powerful, why are the women making the rules on this? Book never got published. I self-published it on Amazon. Sad to say, it sells much better than Goodwill Toward Men did. And the reason it's sad to say is because it's a catharsis. It's not progressive. It's not helping anything.
Well, women's voices honoring men's capabilities is a powerful thing that men need to hear, for sure.
For Goodwill Toward Men.
Yeah,
Goodwill Toward Men,
absolutely.
yes. And that's why it's a shame that book is did not sell nearly as well as If Men Have All the Power, How Come Women Make the Rules? Yeah. Because the guys who are buying If Men Have All the Power, How Come Women Make the Rules are guys who are pissed off and nobody's listening to them, which is pretty much how Trump got tons of men to vote for him.
So why take the title of the book and tell us why? Why is that true?
Because men don't have all the power.
Okay, but do women still make all the rules?
When it comes to discussions of sexism and how we're going to partial out benefits according to sex, and
what do you mean by benefits?
Privileges, protections.
So there's this feeling that's inherent in that men have been at the top too long and we need to claw back some of that power, right?
No.
Okay.
No, women, you're talking like saying that women, like generally speaking, white men have been too long in power, and the feminine and people of color, etc., need to claw back some of that power, take it away.
I'm still not getting what you're saying.
So the reactionary nature of women in these offices that wanted to cancel the book comes from this defensive nature that's informed by this idea that we're expressing. And so anything that doesn't fit with that is dangerous to the women's movement because it reinforces old tropes about men.
So the point of what you're saying is what?
Something in women got triggered by the idea of what you're expressing in these two books. One is that women validated that men are good. And then another book that pushes on this idea that men don't really have all the power, and this story of victimhood that women are expressing is somewhat of a hollow tale, and that women make all the rules, right?
Well, what's implicit in the title is women make all the rules when it comes to gender issues. That's the implicit thing. If men have all the power about everything, how come women make the rules on this very important subject?
Bodily autonomy. That's why. Because men. I mean, I'm going to be one of these tropes for a second. Men want to get laid. It's like so much of why we do things on like a broad spectrum of things is about satisfying that sex drive. And it's testosterone intoxication on one level, right? And so in order for men to have access to that, they have to conform to the desires and needs for women where women can allow that to occur for themselves.
Sounds like a power play on the part of women. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm saying it's, again, more of this biological imperative. Like Women arousal is slower and more methodical, and male arousal is quick and urgent.
And
right?
who controls the sexuality that men find so compelling and overwhelming?
But it's a trope. But you know what I'm reminded of? I just studied the play Lystrata, the Greek play, where the women rebelled and held back sex from the men so the war would end. So this dynamic has existed for centuries of, again, we're speaking in generalities, but there does seem to be a biological element of men want to get laid and women have the power to give that or hold it back.
Guess what? Women want to get laid too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
For
yeah,
sure.
absolutely. And men just give it away.
Because we can't help ourselves.
Not all men and not all women fit into the trope we're constructing, right? That this is a complex issue.
That's really a software problem too. If men understood how much women like sex, they could bargain much better for
well, that's the thing. Men do. There are lots of men who have lots of sex, and they typically, statistically,
can bargain not for more sex, but for better treatment.
Well, that too.
Fairer treatment.
For sure. Absolutely.
For defense of their dignity and for their not being treated like dogs who just have to get laid.
Well, the male refinement is just as important as feminine refinement. Like, we want to rise above these biological influences, but what I'm saying is there's a certain amount of gravitas to them that influences our behavior beyond the cultural context, right? And so these two things combine. And then the third thing is that when you look at high-performing, high-income earning men, they often have access to more feminine sexual encounters. Because of the nature.
Next question. What's the correlation between them having more sex with having more happiness?
Well, happiness isn't even on the table in this discussion just yet.
Well, no, I'm putting it on the table.
I get it.
That's
but
exactly what's not put on the table for men. For men, the standard measures of success are how much money you have and how many women you've laid, which we know is bullshit. It's not going to make you happy in any long-term way. But it's what men have been sold as their yardstick for whether they're good men or not, and whether they deserve to be happy and proud and
satisfied. Are less happy than they would be if they were able to get more of what they want, too. So the happiness scale, it unfolds
it's not
in weird
sex
ways
that they
across.
want. It's not sex that they want. It's sex would be fine. The primary thing they want is fairness, and they want to maintain their integrity and their dignity, and they are not interested in just giving away their whole souls so they can get their dicks wet.
Well, I think there's an element that we're talking about sex in the realm of alcohol and drugs. It's an element that one can take to escape some deeper emotions and biological things going on. And part of what I hear you speaking of, Jack, is and going back to at the beginning of this conversation, at a very early age, you had a strong resonance of joy that came from a place of nurturing. And it wasn't a temporary hit of a chemical shot to the brain. It was a long-lasting experience.
Yes. On the issue, thank you. On the issue of biological needs and men wanting to get laid, here's a theory for you. What men really want is to be touched. There is a woman at the University of Florida, at some university in Florida. She's associated with the medical school. Her name is Tiffany Fields, PhD, whose specialty is on the benefits of human touch. You know how when you go to a hardware store and you need one bolt, and it's the bolt you need is on a card behind a cellophane window with 23 other bolts that you don't really need. You just need that one bolt. I think what happens to men a lot is that, and I'm pretty sure this is scientifically proven, men don't get touched very much. Men do not get the physiological benefits that Dr. Fields has chronicled and documented. And so we want to go and get that bolt. But I'm a man, and I can't go up to my buddy and say, "Oh, I love you, thank you. Oh, hug me, please."
That won't look good in the boardroom.
That's there are. I mean,
well, it's getting more and more possible. It's
okay. It's getting more and more possible.
Like your
but at
work
the same,
and my work. Yeah.
But at the same time, Mark, you know that middle school boys, if they touch each other by accident, they have to say no homo. It's not getting that much better. Okay, hold on. You want the one bolt, but it's bundled with all this other stuff that you might be interested in later, but it's not really what you're needing right now. Physical touch for men is bundled with sex with women. And it's not necessarily what we want, but it is something that women can control. It's very much a physical control, almost as striking as a man's physical control over a woman if he wants to threaten her with his bigger muscles. You will do what I want, or I will whack you. You will do what I want, or you won't get touched. Gotta stop. Gotta stop.
Yeah, I recognize what you're saying, that the focus on the sexual aspects of this is where the approved male desire matrix is allowed. But then in the broader spectrum of human connection and what real intimacy is, and nurturing community, nurturing touch is functionally much more effective in the happiness index. I totally agree with you on this idea that you're talking about. And how we get that and what we think we need versus what we actually need is where men need help. And there's a study that I've heard, can't quote the name of the study or the doctor, but there was this sexual study done where they looked at, men want sex and women want, emotional intimacy. And the truth is, from what this study showed me, was that it's actually women want sexual partners that know what to do properly for them to have the sexual, because they can get emotional intimacy anywhere they want. And men want emotional intimacy, but the only way they think they can get it is sexually. And it's actually that sweet spot after sex where the touching and the communal connection is, that's the thing that the nutrient men really want. And the work that we have to do as men is, how do we gain access to that nutrients in non-sexual ways with both men and women? Because as you say, the affirmation of human touch and the human element of connectivity and belonging and attachment theory, all of these things come together in that physiological reflection. And so we live in a thing where it's like, you're not supposed to touch women. It's an assault, even if you right? And so these are the challenges and that are being proffered onto us by the context of our social conditioning, which is, as you point out, unfriendly male media tropes, right? It's like, we're not teaching men how to get at this level of nutrient, for sure.
Mark, you are a good man. I can tell that. You do men's work. You're interested in men. I hope you are interested in men for men's sake as well as women's sake. You talked less than a minute ago, you talked about the work that we men need to do. Can you talk at all about the work women need to do?
I have some ideas.
And I hear them.
Deprogramming our conditioning transcends sexual orientation or sexual identity. So we all need to work at the difference between what we think we're supposed to do and what's expected of us and what is actually available to us. So women's work is to deconstruct the value relationship they have with their appearance and the way that they can use power to get what they want, and realize that abundance is actually everywhere and available to them through their own regular creative process. And taking and deprogramming their amygdala, their fear responses, to the way the world operates. And there's this element of what psychologists call projection, where if you're fearing something or you're on the outlook for something, then you're basically painting everything with that until you get some other evidence. So opening for women, as the way I see it, speaking from my perspective, is that being able to drop that center of vigilance and actually see what it is that they're experiencing in real time, and be able to evaluate the safety of it and the nurturing of it against not this dynamic that is set up by the cultural influences of how we judge people, but on their own operating system, what feels good to them, what doesn't feel good to them. The context of that is complicated for them because there is a history of male violent access to touch that is imprinted in their trauma of over the genetic trauma down the years, right? And it's commonly referred to as patriarchy. So men need to create more safety and dismantle these toxic aspects of patriarchy, and women need to dismantle the framework that has them holding on to these negative stories and fears about men, and being more open to creating safety for themselves and agency for themselves. And this came up in a conversation I was having yesterday with someone. There was an older man who was being observed as being very invitational to a younger woman. And in this case, the younger woman was probably not an adult, under 18. And the older man was depicted as being in his 70s. And the response of the story I was getting was being relayed to me through the eyes of a woman. And she was saying, this guy needs to be corralled. He needs to be trained. He's not safe. And I was like, definitely, he needs to learn more about what is appropriate and how to run, relationship building. And then I said, and I have a lot of confidence in a 17-year-old woman in 2025 being able to not fall for that kind of bullshit and not being at risk to it. And so there's this story of women's fragility that needs to get deconstructed. And that's part of women's empowerment, right? But those things they go hand in hand to the level of which male aggression is focused on domination and acquisition of sexual encounters through force. And those things have to be decoupled together. It's like the détente of the sexual dynamics. And that's kind of how I see that answer to that question.
Hey, let's talk about something else that might need to be connected here.
Great.
What fears do you think exist in the male amygdala about the dangers they face from women?
Well, being cast out, being labeled and defined through the negative lens of the things that you talked about at the very beginning of this, the lazy, good for nothing, right? And then the criminal justice system overreaching and the presumption of innocence being wiped out simply by a casual accusation. And we saw that women need to be heard. Like, this is true. And when the Me Too movement showed up, men were convicted in the court of public opinion without any kind of actual discussion of things. And more, we became aware that, the things that movie mogul did were wrong, and that's definitely not how we want society to operate. There's this other thing that it's this presumption that all men operate this way, and that's based on a lot of past evidence of male behavior, right? But what men fear is being cast out, being canceled, being labeled either socially or criminally as dangerous to women.
You know, to you both, there's a great stand-up comic I admire, Bill Burr, that has a routine about this. And at the seed of part of his routine is, if we can't examine things and have a conversation about it, then we can't heal and learn. So if there's let's say a woman's hit, and we don't want that to happen, but if we can't ask, well, why was she hit? What happened? You know, in his routine, he says, like, if you get bit by a rattlesnake, you want to know, well, what were you doing? Were you poking it? Were you fucking with it?
And if two books, Goodwill Towards Men, and If Men Have All the Power and How Can Women Make All the Rules, can't get published, that's a real conversation killer.
Right. Exactly.
Man.
This feels like a real good place to land, if it's okay with you both.
There is one little thing that is in my head that I want to put out there.
Please.
About the idea of the alpha man. We all think, not we all think, it's sort of an icon, a goal for men to want to be young boys think they got to be alpha men because they think that that's what women want. They want an alpha man. And the software piece that I hope to make go viral, on thumb drives, etc., into male minds is that much better than being an alpha man or an alpha male is being an alphabet male. Not just one letter, all the letters.
Yeah.
And the same message to women. You might think you want an alpha male, but you're much better off if you can find a man who's got an A and all of the other letters of the alphabet.
Or even keeping it personal, you might think you want to be an alpha female, but be all the letters. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, because all those elements of empathy and nourishing, etc., are part of the whole. If we could all become whole.
There's been some research and then a recanting of the research, where a person who does research on wolf packs, and a lot of the things that has us looking at this concept of the alpha male was based on this idea that wolves had an alpha in the leadership pack. And it turned out that that wasn't actually true. And the scientist who did that went back and wrote another paper about how the actual leader of the wolf's clan is not the most powerful, strongest guy out front, that there's another paradigm to leadership in the wolf clan. And so one of the problems we have in this particular case is we've taken this thing that was this thing about wolves, and then we've translated to this ideal that we've set for men and women, and it's not actually a functional aspect of nature, that it's much more complex than that. And Jack, you rightfully so brought in this idea that we are much broader than these kinds of tropes and kinds of archetypes that we try to pigeonhole ourselves into, and we actually need to talk more, I think, in this discussion about the way that American culture created fathers that weren't in the family unit anymore, and the impact of that on male behavior and male growth. And that's like another whole hour at least, but we don't necessarily have time for it. But I think it's worth mentioning that divorce courts and social engineering and this idea of, fuck men, get them out of your life, we don't need them, that degrades family units, and that leaves boys who are fatherless, who are now in an even deeper hole than the cultural conditioning of the traditional American family ideals. And so we need to look at that and address that. And that's one of the pieces that needs to get solved as we unwind all this stuff with each other, is how do we help family units have effective partnering, even if the independence of the two parties, the mom and the father, opens up a little bit. right? This idea that the man is gone from the family home, that's a powerfully destructive force in our culture. And we need to unwind that and unpack that and shift that as a part and parcel to men and women also evolving the way they perceive and misperceive each other.
Amen again. I would like to add that it's also important for young girls to have their dads.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, in fact, that just reminds me, I heard someone very powerfully say that a young girl learns what it means to be loved by her father. And so if the father's not there to show, and obviously it's not sexual. Well, if it is, that's but like the father's role is so important in showing an element of love. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jack, for showing up fully. It's been really, really interesting to have conversation with you about this, and it's made me more curious about the books that you've read, that you've written, and there's even more to talk about with the Alternatives to Violence project that you worked on, and there's so much more that we could have gotten into here. If we were Joe Rogan, we'd go 3 hours. One day we will, and maybe some point we could have you back to have a broader.
You mean you're not Joe Rogan?
No.
Oh my God.
The bank account says no.
So do the biceps.
Yeah. And Jack, I want to say that the surface of just looking at who you were from your male-friendly media and the website, this was not the conversation I was expecting. And I'm also, with Mark, deeply grateful for being in communication with you and this time you shared with us. It's been wonderfully powerful.
Thank you. It's been a joy for me as well. Thank you.
And congratulations to the audience. If you made it this far, you've really benefited from this conversation. Thank you for coming.
We do have one more question, Jack, and oftentimes it has no merit to the reality of the three of us together, but here it is. Eminem or Foo Fighters?
Oh my God, you're talking to a man who was born in 1951. You could give me Beatles or Dave Clark 5, and I would be able to answer. Okay, Foo Fighters, I think I know some of their stuff. No, I'm thinking of Goldfinger. Is there a Goldfinger?
There is, yeah.
Yeah, it's no Foo Fighters or Eminem.
Yeah.
What do I know about Eminem? He's 7 Mile Road in Detroit, and he's a rapper. 8 Mile Road?
Yeah.
That's what I know about him. I think he did a movie, and I might have seen a piece of it. I don't even know anything Foo Fighters have done. So how about if I say Em and Foo?
How about we do this? Beatles or Dave Clark 5?
I really like the Dave Clark 5. I'm not exactly sure why, but yeah. You know who my first concert was? Do you remember? You don't remember. You don't know. Jerry and the Pacemakers?
Oh, yeah. I know Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Okay, that was my first concert.
Wow.
So they are really my number one favorite. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining us. We'll talk soon, I hope, and maybe we'll do round 2 in the near future.
Yep. That would be wonderful. I'd love to do that. Thank you, gentlemen.
Recording stopped.